Jonathan sat in his dressing room, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He looked perfect: black tuxedo, crisp white shirt, and neatly folded pocket square. His hair was freshly cut, and his shoes shined like polished glass. Everything about him screamed successful groom, a man ready to start a new life with the woman he had chosen. But inside, he felt anything but ready. Hello, family. Welcome to Storytime Virtually. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like, and share this video to your friends and loved ones. Don't forget to turn on post notifications for more videos. Sit back, relax as we dive into the story. His heart pounded, his palms felt sweaty, and a tightness gripped his chest that had nothing to do with the fitted suit he wore. He tried to shake it off. It was just wedding day jitters, right? Every man felt this way before taking the biggest step of his life. The sound of laughter and music floated in from the grand hall, where guests were already seated, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Jonathan could hear the deep voice of the master of ceremonies announcing the program, hear the clinking of glasses, and the occasional bursts of applause. Everything was moving forward smoothly. It was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. So, why did it feel like he was suffocating? A sharp knock on the door pulled him out of his thoughts. "Jonathan, man, you good?" It was Eric, his best friend and best man. Eric peeked inside before stepping in, closing the door behind him. He was dressed in a navy blue suit, looking effortlessly sharp. Jonathan forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm good." Eric studied him, his eyes narrowing. "You don't look good. You look like you just saw a ghost." Jonathan let out a dry laugh. "It's just nerves, man." Eric smirked. "Nerves? Bro, you're Jonathan Williams, CEO of Williams Enterprises. You don't get nervous. You close billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, and now you're panicking over saying, 'I do'?" Jonathan chuckled, but it felt hollow. Eric sat down beside him. "All right, tell me what's up. You having second thoughts about Moren?" Moren, the woman he was about to marry. She was everything a man could dream of: intelligent, ambitious, breathtakingly beautiful. Her father was a respected businessman, and their families had been thrilled when they got engaged. A power couple, they called them. On paper, they were perfect together. So, why did it feel like something was missing? Jonathan exhaled, rubbing his face. "It's not about Moren. It's just, I feel like something isn't right." Eric frowned. "What do you mean?" Jonathan hesitated. How could he explain something he didn't even understand himself? Before he could answer, there was another knock at the door. A soft, hesitant knock. And the moment he heard it, his body went rigid. That knock. That familiar rhythm. Jonathan's heart stopped. He knew that knock. It had been years since he last heard it, but it was burned into his memory. He stood up abruptly, his breath catching in his throat. Eric looked confused. "Bro, what's wrong?" Jonathan didn't answer. He moved to the door, hesitated for a second, then slowly opened it. And there she was. Lillian. The woman he had once loved more than anything. The woman he had promised forever to, before life and circumstances tore them apart. She stood there, her hands clutching the strap of her handbag tightly, as if she was trying to keep herself from shaking. She looked almost the same deep brown eyes that could see straight through him, same soft features, same presence that once made him feel like he belonged. But there was something different now. A heaviness in her eyes. A sadness that hadn't been there before. Jonathan swallowed hard. "Lillian?" Eric stood up, his face filled with confusion. "Wait, who is she?" Lillian's eyes flickered to Eric before returning to Jonathan. "I need to talk to you. Alone." Eric turned to Jonathan. "Man, you don't have time for this. You're getting married in less than an hour." Jonathan knew that. He knew that. But something in Lillian's voice told him that whatever she had to say was important. Maybe even life-changing. "Give me 5 minutes," Jonathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Eric sighed, rubbing his temples. "Jonathan, just 5 minutes." Eric muttered something under his breath, then walked out of the room, shaking his head. Now it was just the two of them. Jonathan and Lillian. Two people who had once been everything to each other. Now standing here like strangers. The silence between them stretched for a moment before Jonathan finally spoke. "What are you doing here?" His voice came out sharper than he intended. Lillian flinched slightly, but didn't look away. "I know this is the worst possible time, but I had to see you." Jonathan clenched his jaw.
"Why?"
"We haven't spoken in years, Lillian. Why now?" She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. Then, she said the words that made the floor beneath him feel like it was crumbling. "I'm pregnant, Jonathan." For a second, he thought he had misheard her.
His ears rang.
His mind struggled to process what she had just said. "What?" he finally whispered. "I'm pregnant," she repeated, her voice steady, but filled with emotion. Jonathan's legs felt weak. He stumbled back slightly, gripping the edge of the table for support. This wasn't happening. Not today.
Not now.
He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. "Lillian, how?" His voice trailed off. She gave a sad smile. "It happened before you disappeared on me." Jonathan squeezed his eyes shut, guilt crashing over him like a tidal wave. He hadn't disappeared on her. Or at least, that's what he had told himself. After their breakup, he had thrown himself into work, traveling, building his empire, and ignoring the ache in his chest. He had convinced himself that leaving Lillian behind was for the best.
But now
she was standing here carrying his child. Lillian continued, her voice softer now. "I found out 2 months ago. I tried reaching you, but you changed your number. I didn't want to ruin your wedding day, but you deserve to know." Jonathan opened his mouth to say something, anything, but no words came out. Lillian's eyes searched his face, looking for something, an answer, a reaction, anything. But Jonathan was drowning in emotions he couldn't even name. I need time," he finally muttered. Lillian exhaled, nodding. "I understand. But Jonathan, don't take too long. This isn't just about us anymore." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Jonathan standing there, completely frozen. His entire world had just shifted, and for the first time in his life, he had no idea what to do. Jonathan stood there, motionless, as the door clicked shut behind Lillian. His mind was in complete chaos. His wedding was minutes away. The guests were waiting. Moren was probably getting ready to walk down the aisle, expecting to see him standing at the altar, smiling, ready to promise forever. And yet, here he was, standing alone in a dimly lit dressing room, his heart pounding in his chest. "She's pregnant." Those words echoed in his mind, over and over again, like a cruel joke from the universe. This wasn't how today was supposed to go. He should have been thinking about his future with Moren, about their perfect life together. Instead, he was drowning in memories of Lillian. Memories of laughter, of whispered promises, of a love that had once felt so unbreakable. And now a baby. Their baby. Jonathan ran a hand down his face, his breath shaky. He needed to think. He needed to figure out what to do. But there was no time. A sharp knock on the door made him jolt. "Jonathan, we need to go." Eric's voice came through. "It's time, man. Everyone's waiting." Jonathan's throat felt dry. Time was up. He couldn't process this right now. Couldn't let himself fall apart. So, he did what he had always done. He pushed his emotions aside and focused on what needed to be done. Taking a deep breath, he straightened his suit, adjusted his tie, and wiped his sweaty palms on his pants. Then he walked out of the room. The ceremony was being held in one of the most luxurious hotels in the city. The grand hall was breathtaking, huge chandeliers draped in crystals, white roses and gold accents decorating every table, and a long red carpet leading to the altar. Hundreds of guests filled the seats, all turned toward the entrance, waiting for the bride. Jonathan walked down the aisle first, his face set in a mask of calmness. But inside, he was anything but calm. The moment he reached the altar, he looked up and saw her.
"Moren."
She stood at the entrance, a vision in white. Her wedding gown was elegant, shimmering under the lights. A long veil framed her face, her makeup flawless. She was breathtaking. And yet, Jonathan felt nothing. No rush of excitement. No overwhelming joy. Just numbness. The music swelled as Moren took slow, graceful steps down the aisle, her father proudly walking beside her. She smiled at him, and Jonathan forced himself to smile back. But it felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. As Moren reached him, her father placed her hand in Jonathan's. Her fingers were warm, delicate. Jonathan swallowed hard. The officiant began speaking, his voice echoing through the hall. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Jonathan Williams and Moren Adams." Jonathan barely heard the words. His mind was spinning. Lillian was carrying his child. What did that mean for Moren? For their marriage? Could he really stand here and promise to be with Moren for the rest of his life, knowing another woman was out there, pregnant with his baby? Jonathan. He blinked, realizing the officiant was looking at him expectantly. It was time for his vows. Jonathan opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. The silence stretched, awkward and heavy. Moren squeezed his hand, her eyes filled with confusion. "Jonathan," she whispered. Jonathan's heart pounded. Everyone was watching, waiting. He had to say something. Finally, he forced the words out. I promise to love you, to honor you, to stand by your side through whatever life brings." His voice was steady, but inside, he felt like he was lying. Because how could he promise to love Moren when his heart was trapped somewhere else? The wedding reception was grand. Guests ate, drank, and danced under golden lights. The air was filled with laughter, the sound of champagne glasses clinking together. But Jonathan barely noticed any of it. He sat beside Moren at the head table, pretending to listen as guests made speeches and toasts. But all he could think about was Lillian. Where was she now? Had she left? Was she okay? "Jonathan." Moren's voice pulled him back. He turned to her, realizing she had been speaking. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. Jonathan forced a smile. "Yeah, just a little tired." She studied him, concern in her eyes. "Are you sure? You've been acting strange all day." Jonathan hesitated. Should he tell her?
No.
Not here.
Not now.
He couldn't ruin their wedding day with this. So he lied. "I'm fine," he said, reaching for her hand. "It's just been a long day." Moren smiled, seemingly reassured. But deep down, Jonathan knew the truth. This was only the beginning. And soon, everything would come crashing down. The night felt never-ending. Jonathan sat at the head table beside Moren, watching as guests laughed, danced, and celebrated. The room was filled with joy, yet he felt like an outsider looking in, disconnected, trapped in a moment that wasn't his. Every now and then, Moren would lean in, whispering something sweet in his ear, her fingers lightly tracing his hand. And every time, he forced a smile, pretending that everything was okay. But inside, he was drowning. Lillian's words echoed in his head. "I'm pregnant, Jonathan." He took a slow sip of champagne, letting the bitterness settle on his tongue. He had to talk to her. He had to know what she expected from him. But how? He couldn't just walk out of his own wedding reception. Moren would notice. Everyone would notice. He needed a plan. Hours passed, and the party began to wind down. Guests started saying their goodbyes, congratulating Jonathan and Moren as they prepared to leave for their hotel suite. Jonathan could feel the pressure building in his chest. Once they left, he would be alone with Moren. There would be no distractions, no escape, and he wasn't ready for that. As they stood near the grand entrance, waiting for the valet to bring their car, Jonathan's phone buzzed in his pocket. His heart lurched. Was it Lillian? Glancing around, he pulled out his phone and discreetly checked the screen. A text message. "Lillian, we need to talk." "Please, Jonathan." His throat tightened. He needed to see her.
Now.
Turning to Moren, he forced a tired smile. "Babe, I just need to use the restroom before we go." She frowned slightly. "Do you need me to come with you?" No, he said quickly, shaking his head. "Just wait here. I won't be long." Before she could ask any more questions, he turned and walked away. But instead of heading to the restroom, he slipped through a side exit, away from the crowd, away from the watchful eyes of his new wife. His heart pounded as he stepped outside into the cool night air. And there, standing in the dim glow of a street lamp, was Lillian. She looked different. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by something else: hesitation, uncertainty. Her hands rested on her stomach, protective, as if she was afraid of what he might say. Jonathan took a slow step toward her. "Lillian." Her eyes searched his face. "You left your wedding reception to see me?" "I had to." His voice was barely a whisper. "I need to know everything." She let out a shaky breath. "I didn't come today to ruin your wedding, Jonathan." "Then why?" Her eyes softened. "Because you deserve to know the truth. I didn't want to hide this from you." His gaze dropped to her stomach. "How far along are you?" 3 months. Jonathan exhaled sharply. 3 months. That meant... The realization hit him like a slap. It happened before he proposed to Moren. Back when he and Lillian had shared that one final night together, when emotions had been high and they had convinced themselves that, just for a moment, they could pretend they were still in love. And now, that single night had changed everything. Jonathan raked a hand through his hair. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "I tried," she said, her voice breaking. "I wanted to tell you, Jonathan, but every time I got close, you were already planning your future with her. I didn't know if you'd even care." He stared at her, feeling the weight of her words. "Of course I care. This is my child too, Lillian." She swallowed hard. "I know. That's why I had to come today. Because no matter what happens between us, this baby, our baby, deserves to have a father." Jonathan's chest tightened. He had spent the entire day trying to push his emotions away, trying to convince himself that he had made the right choice by marrying Moren. But standing here, facing Lillian, he realized the truth. His life was no longer just his own. This wasn't just about him and Moren anymore. A child was involved. His child. And no matter what, he couldn't walk away from that. Moren stood near the entrance, her eyes scanning the crowd. Jonathan had been gone for too long. Something didn't feel right. At first, she had dismissed it, told herself that he was just tired, overwhelmed by the long day.
But now?
Now, her gut told her something was wrong. She turned to Eric, who stood nearby. "Have you seen Jonathan?" Eric hesitated. He said he was going to the restroom." "That was 20 minutes ago," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "He should be back by now." Eric shifted uncomfortably. Maybe he just needed a moment to breathe. It's been a long day. Moren narrowed her eyes.
No.
Something wasn't right. She turned on her heel and began walking toward the building, her heart pounding with every step. And then, through the large glass windows, she saw him. Jonathan. Outside. With a woman. With her. Moren's breath caught in her throat. Even from a distance, she recognized the woman immediately.
Lillian.
Her stomach twisted as she watched them. The way they stood close, the way Jonathan's face was filled with emotion, something he hadn't shown all day. And then, as if to confirm her worst fear, she saw it. Lillian's hand on her stomach. Moren felt the ground shift beneath her feet. No. She took a shaky step back, her mind racing, her world crumbling. Jonathan had been hiding something. And now, she knew exactly what it was. Jonathan had no idea that Moren had seen him. He had no idea that the secrets he had tried so hard to bury were about to explode into the open. All he knew was that, in this moment, everything had changed. He turned back to Lillian, his voice steady. "I won't walk away from this. I need to be in this child's life." Tears filled her eyes. "Are you sure?" "Yes." He nodded. "No matter what happens with Moren, I will do right by you and this baby." For the first time that night, Lillian smiled. But whatever fragile peace they had found was short-lived. Because inside, Moren was already planning her next move. And when the truth finally came out, there would be no going back. Moren stood frozen, her entire body trembling as she watched Jonathan and Lillian outside. The way he looked at her, the way he touched her arm, his eyes filled with something deep and unspoken. And then, the most painful sight of all, Lillian's hand resting on her stomach. Moren felt sick. Her mind screamed at her to turn away, to pretend she hadn't seen anything. But how could she? The evidence was right in front of her. Jonathan, her husband, the man she had just married hours ago, was standing with another woman, his past love. And that woman was pregnant with his child. Her chest tightened, and a sharp pain shot through her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. She took a deep breath, clenched her fists, and turned back toward the hall. She needed answers, and she was going to get them. Outside, Jonathan let out a deep sigh. Lillian had just left, her words still ringing in his ears. No matter what happens with Moren, I will do right by you and this baby. He meant those words. He wouldn't abandon his child. He couldn't. But what about Moren? How was he supposed to tell her? How could he explain that the baby was conceived before he even proposed to her?
Would she understand?
Would she forgive him? Or would this be the beginning of the end? Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, his mind a tangled mess of guilt, fear, and responsibility. Then, he took a deep breath and turned to go back inside. But the moment he stepped through the doors, he saw her. Moren, standing in the middle of the empty hall, waiting. Her eyes met his, and the fire in them sent a shiver down his spine. She knew. Moren's heels clicked against the marble floor as she walked toward him. Each step was controlled, slow, deliberate. Jonathan swallowed hard. He had prepared himself for this moment, but now that it was here, words failed him. Moren stopped just a few feet away, arms crossed over her chest. "Where were you?" Her voice was quiet, but there was no mistaking the steel behind it. Jonathan hesitated. "Moren, She tilted her head. "Don't lie to me, Jonathan."
He sighed.
There was no use hiding it now. "I was with Lillian," he admitted. A bitter laugh escaped Moren's lips. "Of course you were." Jonathan took a step forward. "Moren, please let me explain." She held up a hand. "I don't need an explanation, Jonathan. I already know." Jonathan's breath hitched.
She knew?
Moren's voice wavered, but her eyes never left his. "I saw you, Jonathan. I saw you with her. I saw the way you looked at her. I saw her hand on her stomach." Jonathan felt his world tilt. "Moren." Her voice cracked. "Tell me the truth. Is she pregnant?" Jonathan's throat went dry. This was it. The moment that would decide everything. He could lie. He could try to protect her from the pain. But he had already caused enough damage. He owed her the truth. "Yes," he whispered. Moren's face twisted in pain. She turned away, pressing a hand to her forehead. Jonathan reached out, but she stepped back. "Moren, please." She let out a sharp breath, turning back to him. "How long have you known?" "Tonight," he admitted. "She told me tonight." Moren let out a humorless laugh. "So, on our wedding day? That's when you found out you have a baby on the way?" Jonathan shut his eyes. "Moren, I swear, I didn't know before today." She studied his face, searching for a lie. But Jonathan meant every word. She shook her head. "I don't even know what to say." He stepped closer. "Moren, I love you." She let out a shaky breath. "Do you?" His heart clenched.
"Yes."
"Moren, I chose you. I married you." She wiped at her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "But now, you're tied to her forever." Jonathan had no response to that, because it was true. No matter what happened between him and Moren, Lillian would always be in his life now, because of the baby. And nothing could change that. Moren turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. Silence stretched between them. Then finally she spoke. "I need time." Jonathan's stomach dropped. "Moren, please don't do this." She turned back to him, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "You expect me to just accept this? To pretend like everything is fine?" "No," he admitted. "But I don't want to lose you." Moren took a deep breath, her hands shaking. "I don't know if I can do this, Jonathan." His chest tightened. "Moren, I love you. I need you." She let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah? And what about Lillian? What about your baby?" Jonathan had no answer, because he didn't know. All he knew was that his entire world was falling apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Moren turned away again, taking slow, measured breaths. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. I'm going to stay at my parents' house for a while. Jonathan's heart stopped. Moren. I just need space, Jonathan. Her voice wavered. Please. Jonathan's entire body felt cold. But he nodded. Because what else could he do? Moren gave him one last, lingering look before turning and walking away. Jonathan stood there, frozen, as the love of his life walked out the door. And for the first time that night, he truly understood what he had lost. Jonathan sat alone in their empty hotel suite, staring at his wedding ring. The night that was supposed to be the happiest of his life had turned into a nightmare. Moren was gone. His marriage was in shambles. And in a few months, he would be a father. A father. He exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. This wasn't how things were supposed to be.
But this was his reality now.
And no matter how much it hurt, he had to face it. Slowly, he picked up his phone and stared at the last message from Lillian. Lillian, we need to talk about the baby. Jonathan took a deep breath. It was time to stop running. It was time to face his responsibilities. With one final glance at the door where Moren had disappeared, he made his decision. And with trembling fingers, he typed a reply. Jonathan, okay, let's talk. Jonathan barely slept. The hotel suite felt colder than it should have. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Moren's face, the hurt, the betrayal, the pain she tried so hard to hide. When morning came, the weight in his chest hadn't lifted. He picked up his phone and stared at the message he had sent Lillian. She hadn't responded yet. He let out a slow breath, rubbing his temples. His life had changed in the span of a single night. One day ago, he was celebrating his wedding, promising Moren a future of love and happiness. Now she was gone. And he had a child on the way with another woman. He reached for his wedding ring and turned it between his fingers. What was he supposed to do? How was he supposed to fix this? The sound of his phone vibrating pulled him from his thoughts.
Lillian.
She had finally replied. Lillian, can we meet today?
I need to talk to you.
Jonathan stared at the message. He didn't hesitate. Jonathan, yes. Where? An hour later, Jonathan sat across from Lillian in a quiet cafe. She looked tired, her eyes slightly swollen, as if she had been crying. But when she met his gaze, there was no bitterness, no anger, only sadness. She placed her hands on the table, taking a deep breath before speaking. I'm sorry, Jonathan. Jonathan blinked. What? She exhaled shakily. I didn't mean to ruin your wedding. I didn't come to break your marriage. I didn't know what else to do. Jonathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Lillian, this isn't your fault. She let out a soft, humorless laugh. Isn't it? I should have told you earlier. I should have given you time to handle this before your wedding. But I was scared. Jonathan sighed. I was scared too. Lillian nodded, looking down at her hands. Jonathan, I need to know what happens now. Jonathan swallowed hard. That was the question, wasn't it? What happened now? He looked at her, at the woman he had once loved, at the mother of his child, at someone who is now forever tied to him. I don't have all the answers, he admitted. But I do know one thing. She met his gaze. I will be there for the baby, no matter what. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. That's all I needed to hear. Jonathan reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. You're not alone in this, Lillian. We'll figure it out together. She nodded, but there was something else in her eyes. Something unspoken. Jonathan, she hesitated. Do you think there's any chance for us? Jonathan's breath hitched. He hadn't been expecting that. His heart clenched as he thought of Moren, of the woman he had just married, of the woman he had vowed to love forever. He shook his head. Lillian, I can't do that to Moren. I love her. Lillian nodded slowly, a small, sad smile on her lips. I understand. She wiped another tear away and took a deep breath. I won't get in the way of your marriage, Jonathan. But I just need you to be there for the baby. Jonathan nodded. Always. And with that, an unspoken agreement settled between them. One of responsibility. of co-parenting, of moving forward separately. Jonathan knew he had one more thing to do. He needed to talk to Moren, to make things right. Even if she never forgave him, he needed her to know the truth. He arrived at her parents' house in the evening, his heart pounding in his chest. Her mother answered the door, eyeing him with disapproval. "She doesn't want to see you, Jonathan." Jonathan swallowed hard. "Please, ma'am, just 5 minutes." Her mother studied his face, then sighed and stepped aside. "I'll ask her." He stood in the doorway, waiting, every second feeling like an eternity. Then, finally, Moren appeared. Her eyes were tired, her face unreadable.
She didn't speak.
She just stepped outside and closed the door behind her. Jonathan took a deep breath. "Moren." She folded her arms. "What do you want, Jonathan?" His throat tightened. I just need to talk to you." She raised an eyebrow. "Talk? After everything?" Jonathan sighed. "I know I hurt you, and I can't take that back. But Moren, I swear to you, I didn't know about the baby until last night." She exhaled sharply. "And that's supposed to make me feel better?" "No," he admitted. "But I just need you to know that I never lied to you. I never betrayed you. I love you, Moren." She looked away, blinking rapidly. "Moren, please," he continued. "I don't want to lose you." Tears welled in her eyes. "Jonathan, this isn't just about me. This is about a child. A child that will be in your life forever. And that means Lillian will be in your life forever." Jonathan nodded. "I know." She let out a shaky breath. "And I don't know if I can handle that." His heart clenched. Silence stretched between them. Then finally Moren spoke. "I need time, Jonathan." Jonathan felt his chest tighten, but he nodded. "Take all the time you need." She sighed, looking up at the sky. "I don't know how this ends." Jonathan reached for her hand. "I just know that I love you, and I will wait for you."
She didn't pull away.
She didn't hold on either. She just stood there, staring at the man she had married, wondering if their love was strong enough to survive the storm. Weeks passed. Jonathan focused on work, trying to give Moren the space she needed. He attended doctor's appointments with Lillian, slowly stepping into the role of a father. And little by little he found a way to balance his responsibilities. One evening, after weeks of silence, his phone rang. Moren. His heart pounded as he answered. "Hello." A deep breath on the other end. Then, finally, "Jonathan, can we talk?"
Hope surged in his chest.
"Yes," he whispered. "Of course." Because no matter what happened next, he knew one thing for sure. He was ready to fight for their love, to fight for their future. And no matter how complicated things became, he wasn't going to give up.
Not now.
Not ever. After that difficult phone call, a week passed in quiet uncertainty. Jonathan spent many sleepless nights thinking about what had happened. The pain of losing Moren, the shock of Lillian's news, and the responsibility of a future child weighed heavily on him. Every morning, he woke with a mix of regret and hope, wondering if he could ever make things right. One chilly afternoon, Jonathan received another message on his phone. It was from Moren. "Moren, can we meet? I need to talk." Her words were simple, but they carried the promise of a conversation that might help heal old wounds. Jonathan agreed to meet her at a small park near her parents' house, a quiet place with tall trees and a gentle pond. When he arrived, he saw Moren sitting on a bench, wrapped in a soft coat. Her eyes were red and tired, but they also held a spark of determination. They sat in silence for a few moments before Moren finally spoke. "Jonathan, I have been hurting ever since that day," she began, her voice low and steady. "I feel betrayed and lost. I married you with hope, and now everything feels shattered." Jonathan's heart ached as he listened. He took a deep breath and replied, "Moren, I know I hurt you. I made choices that have caused so much pain, and I am truly sorry. I never meant for things to turn out this way." Moren looked away, her eyes fixed on the rippling water in the pond. "I need to know the truth, every time and every word. I know about Lillian. I know you have a child on the way." Her voice trembled slightly. "How am I supposed to trust you now?" Jonathan reached out, hesitating before gently placing his hand over hers. "I understand your anger and hurt. I was confused and scared. But I promise you, I will always take care of the child. And I will always try to be the man you married. I am willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild the trust we once had." They talked for what felt like hours. Moren asked many questions about that fateful night and the decisions Jonathan had made. Jonathan answered honestly, admitting his mistakes and the deep regret he felt. While the conversation was painful, it was also a beginning, a small step toward understanding and healing. In the weeks that followed, both Jonathan and Moren agreed to seek counseling. They met with a kind, patient therapist who helped them talk about their feelings and the confusion that had overwhelmed their lives. In these sessions, Jonathan learned how to face the truth of his past, while Moren learned how to express her pain and needs without letting anger consume her. At the same time, Jonathan continued to meet with Lillian. They arranged a respectful co-parenting plan for their unborn child. In these meetings, they discussed schedules, support, and the kind of life they hoped to provide for their baby. Although the conversation was always delicate, both agreed that the child's well-being would be their shared priority. Jonathan worked hard to show both women that he could be responsible and caring. With Lillian, he attended doctor's appointments and prepared a small nursery in a spare room of his apartment. With Moren, he wrote letters, sent messages of sincere apologies, and slowly began to rebuild a fragile bridge of trust. One bright morning, while walking through the park, Jonathan saw Moren sitting on the same bench where they had talked weeks before. This time, her posture was more relaxed, and a soft smile played on her lips. He sat beside her, and they talked about small things, favorite memories, a book they both enjoyed, and the dreams they once shared. The conversation was gentle and careful, like testing the strength of a delicate vine that had the potential to grow strong once more. They began to meet more regularly. Sometimes they would walk together, sometimes they would share a quiet meal. Each meeting, no matter how brief, was a tiny step toward healing. They still had many wounds to mend, and the road ahead was uncertain. But for the first time in months, both of them dared to hope that their love might one day survive the storm. Even as Jonathan faced the challenges of his new life, he kept a photo of Moren in his wallet, a reminder of the love they had shared and the promise of a future worth fighting for. Late at night, he would hold his wedding ring in his hand and think about the second chance he was trying to earn. In the quiet moments before sleep, he prayed for forgiveness and for the strength to be a better man for both Moren and his unborn child. Slowly, the tension began to ease. The counseling sessions provided new insights, and the honest conversations helped clear some of the heavy misunderstandings that had built up. Jonathan, Moren, and even Lillian, in her own way, started learning how to put the past behind them while facing the future with cautious hope. Though the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, there was a small light in the distance, a promise that with time, honesty, and effort, their lives could find a new balance. In this new dawn, even though there were scars, there was also the possibility of healing, growth, and, perhaps, a love that had been tested by fire but was not yet lost. And so, with every new day, Jonathan took a step forward, ready to face his responsibilities, to mend what was broken, and to embrace the promise of a future that was still his to shape. Moren sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the framed wedding photo on her nightstand. She traced her fingers over the image of herself in a white gown, standing beside Jonathan, who had once been her whole world. So much had changed since that day. Her heart had been shattered, and even though she had begun to heal, a question still lingered. Could she truly move forward with Jonathan? She had seen the effort he was making. He had been patient, respectful, and determined to mend the damage he had caused. He had attended every counseling session without complaint, had been honest about his regrets, and had shown his commitment to co-parenting his child with Lillian. But was that enough? She sighed, rubbing her temples. Love alone wasn't enough. Trust was the foundation of any relationship, and hers with Jonathan had been cracked beyond recognition. Her parents had advised her to leave him. "A man who betrays you once will do it again," her mother had said. "You deserve better." Her friends had mixed opinions. Some urged her to forgive and move on, while others told her she deserved someone new. Yet, deep inside, she knew that no one else could make this decision for her. She had to decide whether she could forgive, trust, and rebuild, or if it was time to close this chapter of her life forever. Moren called Jonathan and asked him to meet her at the cafe where they had shared their first date years ago. When he arrived, she saw how much he had changed. He looked different, more serious, more thoughtful, as if the past few months had aged him. He pulled out her chair for her, a small act of kindness that used to be second nature between them. They ordered coffee, and for a few minutes, they sat in silence. Finally, Moren spoke. "Jonathan, I asked you here because I need to make a final decision. We've been trying to fix things, but I need to know the truth. Do you still love me?" Jonathan exhaled deeply, his eyes searching hers. "Moren, I never stopped loving you. What I did to you was unforgivable, and I hate myself for it every day. But my love for you is real. And if you give me one more chance, I swear, I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worthy of it." His words were sincere, but Moren had heard promises before. She needed more than words. "Do you regret what happened with Lillian?" she asked. Jonathan nodded. "Not the child, never the child. But I regret everything else. I regret hurting you, breaking your trust, and losing our happiness. If I could go back, I would make a different choice. But I can't. All I can do now is be the man you deserve." Moren sighed, stirring her coffee. She had expected to feel anger, but instead, she felt something different, tiredness. "I don't hate you, Jonathan," she finally said. "But I don't know if I can ever trust you the way I used to." His face fell slightly, but he nodded. "I understand." She looked at him carefully. He had been patient. He had fought for their marriage, and he had accepted her feelings without trying to force her decision. Maybe, just maybe, he was truly changing. Moren took a deep breath. "I don't have an answer for you today, but I'm willing to take it one step at a time. We can try counseling for a little longer. We can try dating again and see where that leads." Jonathan's eyes widened slightly. He had expected a yes or a no, but instead, she was offering a middle path. "You mean you're not leaving me?" he asked cautiously. "I'm not promising anything," she clarified. "But I'm not walking away yet." A flicker of hope crossed Jonathan's face. He reached for her hand, but she pulled back slightly. "Not yet," she said gently. He smiled sadly. "I'll wait." Moren gave him a small nod. Maybe trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. But if Jonathan was truly willing to fight for them, maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. For now, the future was uncertain. But it wasn't over yet. Moren and Jonathan agreed to take things slowly. It wasn't easy. Every conversation felt delicate, as if one wrong word could shatter the fragile understanding they had built. Jonathan remained patient, never rushing Moren for an answer. He focused on proving his love through actions rather than words. Instead of pressuring her, he showed up. He was there when she needed to talk. He attended every marriage counseling session without fail. He respected her space, giving her time to heal. Moren, on the other hand, wrestled with her emotions daily. Some days, she felt hopeful, seeing the effort Jonathan was making. Other days, the pain of betrayal felt fresh, and she wondered if she was making a mistake by holding on. Through it all, she realized one thing: Jonathan was truly trying. But was it enough? One of the biggest challenges was Lillian's presence in their lives. Jonathan was committed to being a responsible father to his child, which meant he had to be involved in Lillian's life to some extent. Moren struggled with this. Every time she saw Lillian, she was reminded of Jonathan's betrayal. No matter how much she tried to separate the past from the present, it wasn't easy. One evening, as she sat alone in her living room, she received a message from Lillian. "Lillian, can we meet? I think we need to talk." Moren stared at the message, debating whether to respond. A part of her wanted nothing to do with Lillian, but another part knew that avoiding her wouldn't change reality. The next day, Moren met Lillian at a small cafe. They sat in awkward silence for a moment before Lillian spoke. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see," Lillian began. But I needed to say this in person. Moren folded her arms. Go ahead. Lillian sighed. I never meant to destroy your marriage, Moren. I was struggling, and when I found out I was pregnant, I was scared. I reached out to Jonathan because I needed help, not because I wanted to come between you two. Moren exhaled sharply. But you did come between us. I know, Lillian admitted. And I hate that. But I also have a child to think about. I don't want any drama. I just want to raise my child in peace, and I don't want you to think I'm trying to take Jonathan from you. Moren studied Lillian's face. She didn't see a woman scheming to ruin her life. She saw a mother trying to navigate a difficult situation. For the first time, Moren realized that Lillian wasn't her enemy. The situation was painful, yes, but it wasn't as black and white as she had once believed. I don't know if I can ever be comfortable with you, Moren admitted. But I appreciate your honesty. Lillian nodded. That's fair. I just hope we can coexist without hostility, for the child's sake. Moren hesitated, then gave a small nod. I'll try. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't friendship, but it was a step forward. As time passed, Jonathan continued to respect Moren's boundaries. He didn't push her to move faster than she was ready for. One evening, they sat on the balcony of their home, watching the sunset. It had been a long time since they had spent a peaceful moment together like this. Jonathan turned to her. Do you ever think we'll be okay again? Moren was silent for a long time. Then she whispered, I don't know, but I think we're better than we were before. A small smile touched Jonathan's lips. That's enough for now. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the tension between them began to ease. They laughed a little more, shared conversations without awkwardness, and found moments of genuine connection. Moren wasn't ready to fully trust Jonathan again, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like there was hope. Maybe, just maybe, they still had a future together. And for now, that was enough. The months passed, and Moren and Jonathan continued their slow journey toward healing. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. There were still moments of doubt, moments of pain, and moments when Moren wondered if she was making the right choice. But there were also moments of laughter. Small, unexpected moments where she found herself smiling at something Jonathan said. Moments where she caught herself remembering why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. Jonathan, for his part, remained consistent. He showed up. He respected her boundaries. He never rushed her. But there was one thing that remained unsaid between them. What would happen next? Would they ever go back to being husband and wife in the true sense? Or were they simply going through the motions, hoping that time would heal everything? Moren wasn't sure. One afternoon, as Moren was leaving work, she received a call from Jonathan. Hey, are you busy? He asked. I just closed from work. Why? I have something to show you, he said, his voice nervous. It's important. Moren hesitated. Jonathan, if this is about us. It's not what you think, he interrupted. Just trust me. After a moment of hesitation, Moren sighed.
Fine.
Where should I meet you? Jonathan took her to a quiet estate outside the city. When they arrived, she noticed a beautiful house with a small front yard and a garden. Jonathan parked the car and turned to her. Come inside. Moren raised an eyebrow. Jonathan, what is this? Just come, he said. She followed him inside, and as soon as she stepped in, she froze. The house was furnished, but not in a way that screamed new. Instead, it looked like a home that had been designed with care and thought. On the walls were framed photos of them, old pictures from their dating days, their wedding, and even a few candid shots she didn't even remember taking. Moren turned to Jonathan in confusion. What is this place? Jonathan exhaled. It's our new home. Moren's heart pounded. Jonathan, I bought this place because I wanted us to have a fresh start, he said softly. I know I can't erase the past, and I know I can't force you to forgive me. But I wanted us to have something new. A place that isn't tainted by what happened. A place where we can rebuild if you're willing. Moren stared at him, speechless. Jonathan swallowed hard. I know it's a lot, and I don't expect an answer right away. I just wanted you to see that I'm serious about us. About fixing what I broke. Tears welled up in Moren's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "Jonathan, I don't know what to say." "Just think about it," he said softly. She nodded, her heart feeling heavier than ever. Just when Moren thought things couldn't get more complicated, she received another unexpected call, this time from Lillian. "I need to talk to you," Lillian said urgently. Moren frowned. "What's wrong?" "It's about Jonathan's child," Lillian said. "I've made a decision." When they met later that evening, Lillian's expression was serious. "Moren, I've been thinking a lot about everything. About Jonathan, about my child, and about my own life." Moren crossed her arms. "And?" Lillian sighed. "I've decided to move to another city with the baby." Moren blinked in shock. "What?" Lillian nodded. "I think it's best for everyone. Jonathan wants to be a good father, and I'll never stop him from seeing the child. But I also know that my presence is a constant reminder of his mistake. I don't want to be the reason you and Jonathan can't move forward." Moren was stunned. She had spent so much time resenting Lillian that she had never considered that Lillian might be struggling too. "Are you sure about this?" Moren asked. Lillian smiled sadly.
"Yes."
"I need a fresh start too." Moren exhaled deeply. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe things were finally shifting. Maybe the past was finally letting go of its hold on them. That night, Moren lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Jonathan had shown her how much he was willing to change. Lillian was stepping away to give them space. Everything was aligning for her to make a decision. Could she finally let go of the past and take a chance on Jonathan again? She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Tomorrow, she would give him her answer. And this time it would be final. Moren barely slept that night. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of Jonathan, their past, and what their future could be. The house he bought, his efforts, Lillian's unexpected decision, it all pointed toward one thing. Jonathan was trying. He was genuinely trying. But was it enough? As the sun rose, she made a decision. She wouldn't let fear or pain dictate her life. It was time to choose once and for all. She picked up her phone and sent Jonathan a message. "Moren, meet me at the new house at 6 p.m. We need to talk." She took a deep breath. Today, everything would be decided. Jonathan arrived at the house exactly on time. His expression was unreadable, hopeful yet cautious, as if he knew the weight of what Moren was about to say. Moren stood in the living room, her hands clasped together. She took a deep breath before speaking. "I've spent months trying to figure out if I could ever forgive you, if I could ever trust you again," she began. "And the truth is, I don't know if things will ever be the same." Jonathan's face fell slightly, but he remained silent, letting her speak. "But," she continued, "I see the effort you've made. I see how much you've changed, how much you've fought to fix what you broke." She exhaled. "And I want to try. I want to give us a real chance again." Jonathan's eyes widened. "You do?" Moren nodded. "But there will be conditions." "I'll do anything," Jonathan said quickly. Moren held up a hand. "First, we take things slowly. I don't want to rush back into marriage like nothing happened. We rebuild, step by step." Jonathan nodded. "Agreed." "Second, honesty is non-negotiable," she continued. "I need to know that I can trust you again, and that will take time." "You have my word," Jonathan said. Moren studied him carefully. "And finally, if you ever betray me again, Jonathan, that will be the end. No second chances." Jonathan swallowed hard and nodded. "I understand. And I swear, Moren, I will never hurt you like that again." For the first time in a long while, Moren felt like she could breathe again. She reached for his hand, and when their fingers touched, it felt like the beginning of something new. Over the next several months, they took things one step at a time. They went on dates, had deep conversations, and attended counseling together. It wasn't perfect. There were moments when Moren struggled with trust, moments when Jonathan felt frustrated with the slow pace. But they didn't give up. Lillian moved to another city, but Jonathan remained actively involved in his child's life, balancing fatherhood with his relationship with Moren. And then, one evening, as they stood on the balcony of their new home, Jonathan turned to Moren with a small smile. So, does this mean I have a chance of winning you back completely? Moren laughed softly. I think you already have. Jonathan exhaled in relief. I love you, Moren. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, she believed in their future. I love you too, Jonathan, she whispered. And just like that, their journey toward healing truly began. The past had hurt them, but the future was theirs to rewrite. That brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed the story. Thanks for watching.